In our fast-paced world, many of us struggle with overthinking and worry that leaves us feeling overwhelmed or stuck. In this podcast, we will hear stories of successful individuals and have conversations on ways to reach our true potential by embracing every micro detail of our identity, especially the flaws that make us unique. This is your host, Maria Grace Wolk. I'm a Filipino-American entrepreneur, psychotherapist, and mom of 2 boys. And my mission is to amplify diverse perspectives and experiences and inspire your journey to wellness and fulfillment. Hi everyone, this is your host, Maria Grace Wolk. I am so excited to introduce you all today to my guest for today's episode, Joe Sanok. Joe Sanok is keynote and TEDx speaker, business consultant, and podcaster. Joe has the #1 podcast for counselors called the Practice of the Practice podcast. Joe is also a writer for PsychCentral, has been featured on the Huffington Post, Forbes, Good Magazine, Reader's Digest, Entrepreneur on Fire, and Yahoo News. He is the author of 5 books and has been named the Therapist Resource Top Podcast, consultant, and blogger. So it's a privilege to have him here. I'm so honored to be able to interview him and talk about his new book, releasing this week, Thursday is the New Friday. This book cannot have been released at a better time because I know it's been a common theme for mostly everyone, for my colleagues, clients, friends, to feel like they have not been as productive. During this pandemic, it's been really rough. Trying to balance our work and our personal life, it's been a real challenge. And this feeling alone, feeling defeated or feeling of failing daily, it can manifest into burnout and depression, in our career life, in our home life. And why is this? And what can we do to change this? Thursday's the New Friday empowers you with a practical, evidence-based methodology to create your own work schedule and dedicate more of your precious personal time to pursuing your hobbies and spending time with your family and friends. Joe Sanok will explain how we can slow down to speed up. I can't wait for you all to listen in on our conversation. So let's just dive on in. Hello, everyone. I am here today with Joe Sanok, a podcaster and consultant who's here to talk about his new book, which will be released on October 5th, titled Thursday is the New Friday, a book that focuses on how working fewer hours boosts creativity and productivity. I'm super excited to hear all about it, and I want to dive right in. But before we do that, Joe, if you can please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us your story.
Yeah, so I am a podcaster who mostly helps counselors that are starting, growing, and scaling their private practices. Our team also helps people launch podcasts through Podcast Launch School. I'm trained as a therapist, as a counselor and psychologist, and for years really just took that traditional path until 2015 when I jumped into the private practice and consulting world full time and kind of left all that behind. But I would say the biggest thing in my life is I'm a single dad of 2 amazing daughters. So I frequently have glitter in my hair and, we're going to the beach and going for bike rides. And so they're my world and they're wonderful little girls.
That's awesome. Thank you, Joe. Shall we dive right in? You want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah. So Thursday is the New Friday really starts with the concept that the 4-day work week is better for our creativity, our productivity, and it's just better for society. So when I first started writing this book, I really started with what are the kind of questions that I would have about the 4-day work week. And so I just started thinking about, okay, where does the 40-hour work week come from? Where does the 7-day week come from? Just understanding some of that history of how we even got here. And what I discovered just blew my mind. And so if we go back 4,000 years or so to the Babylonians, that's where the 7-day week started. The Babylonians just made it up because they could see the sun, the moon, Earth, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. So they had these 7 major celestial things in Babylon. And that was why they had the 7-day week. The Egyptians, they had an 8-day week. The Romans had a 10-day week. And it wasn't until 300 or so, when the Roman emperor converted to Christianity, that the 7-day week became a really big thing across the Roman Empire. So if we just start with, we made up the 7-day week. It doesn't make sense in nature. We could have had a 5-day week and had 73 of those in a year. It makes sense for the earth to go around the sun and that's a year, or when it spins, that's a day. But there's nothing in nature that gives us 7 days. So if we just start with this thing that we hold dear, the 7-day week is totally made up. Okay, let's start there. Then jump to the late 1800s, early 1900s. The average person was working 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. They were working all the time. So Henry Ford in 1926, in an effort to sell more cars to his own people, instituted the 40-hour work week. His philosophy was that people would not buy a car to get to work faster, but if they had days off where they could go recreate and do whatever they wanted, they're going to want to more quickly get over to their friend's house, get over to their family house, go for a hike somewhere. So to sell more cars, he started the 40-hour work week. So less than 100 years ago, this thing that we think is so solid, the 40-hour work week, was totally made up. So time is made up. I would start there.
I mean, I love it. I always say we should have a 4-day week. Like, it doesn't make sense. And I love this idea. So I want to ask you a question, and it's just going a little bit more personal, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I know that 2012 was a rough year for you, which may have changed your view on time and work. And can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So my oldest daughter had just been born in 2011, and we found out that she had some major heart issues and needed full open heart surgery right before her first birthday in 2012. And so went to University of Michigan, Ronald McDonald House. Our daughter has this open heart surgery. She's all puffy and recovering, and just, watching your kid be in there and have had their whole chest just opened up was just unbearable. Uh, Fast forward 6 weeks or so, and they give the all clear. She's healthy, she's happy, she's healing. Now she's a 10-year-old that has plenty of energy and has no limitations. So I get through that, and then a couple of weeks after getting the all clear for her, I'm diagnosed with thyroid cancer. So when I think I'm out of this medical world, I'm jumping back in. And so going to radioactive iodine treatment and all these other things to help me get through it. And so, that was one of those years. My grandma died. One of my best friend's wives had breast cancer. We all have had or will have a 2012 where it just all hits the fan. And so at that time, I was working at a community college, and I was a college counselor there, had my side counseling business, had just launched Practice the Practice. And what was tough is that it wasn't a job that I hated. I had an amazing boss. I had tons of autonomy. It wasn't this corporate job where it's like, I just want to get out of it. And I had cancer, so I'm leaving. It's one of those things where it was such a great job, but then also it was, do I want to keep living the pace that I'm living, to work 40 hours? And then if I want to make any more money, I've got to have this private practice or this podcast.
Right.
And I realized that I would rather try and leave and potentially fail than to stay within that job and to never know if I had it in me to do something bigger. Yeah, it was a busy year. It was tough, a lot of emotions to work through.
Wow. Okay, so coming out from 2012, then what happens?
Yeah, so then I really started to look at the counseling practice and practice of the practice to lay the groundwork to be able to eventually leave. And then when my second daughter was born, I used the full Family Medical Leave Act to try it out kind of over a 6-month period of time. So I was working 20 hours a week at the community college. Every month was a better month than the month before. And eventually by April of 2015, left that full-time job to go into private practice full-time.
Wow. What a journey. I know that you guys went traveling too, like cross country, right?
Yes.
That came during the pandemic, of course. Like
Yeah. So in July of 2020, bought a camper and took my daughters on the road from September till April. Also September of 2020 until April of 2021, and figured that was better than Zoom school, that they could go actually experience the national parks and to live places and see things that they wouldn't have the opportunity to see. And so lived in a camper throughout that entire time.
That is so cool. I mean, I want to do that. I want to do that. I have 2 boys, and we've been thinking about doing the exact same thing. I was following you. I totally want to talk more about that, but we're going to talk about your book.
No, I would
um,
highly recommend. I mean, just to see your kids like have their minds blown. There's so many times in like the Arizona desert driving during sunset and just seeing these sunsets that were amazing. Or like my 7-year-old, she loved petrified forest. She just loves
oh,
rocks. And to just see this, just like a little guru that could just stare at a rock for days. And or my 10-year-old who loves space. We went to Meteor Crater, and to
mm,
see this crater that's a mile wide and just get this sense of just what space can do and be. I mean, it's insane to see kids experience learning instead of just see it in a book.
yeah, I totally agree. That's how I feel when I'm with my boys having adventures, because I'm like seeing the world. Even if I've been there before, it's like I'm seeing the world through a different lens, and it's a so much better lens. Like I'm in awe of every
Yeah.
little things because of my boys. So
Yeah,
they open up our eyes for sure.
absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to move on to our next questions. You also argue, and this is super important to my listeners too, because it's all about productivity when it comes to now with the pandemic, right? I feel like the pandemic had brought us to feeling so burnt out. And so we feel less productive and then we feel guilty for it. But you argue that slowing down and actually boost productivity. Can you tell us more about this brain research or even
Yeah.
examples?
So I mean, if we start with what we know intuitively, when do we have our best ideas? You know, it's usually when we're taking a shower, when we're going for a hike. Maybe
When we're
you're on a
running.
right when you're running, when you're on a long drive and you turn off the radio and just let your mind wander. It's not when we're stressed out and maxed out that we have these great
Mm.
ideas. You know, I was visiting Nepal in 2001, and we had this guide who said if you get chased by a wild rhinoceros, climb a tree. And I didn't know what that. I was like, I should ask some follow-up questions, but I didn't. So then fast forward, we're in the jungle and I'm taking pictures of this rhinoceros that's there. And I have a point and click camera, not a digital one. And I keep taking steps closer and closer to this rhino to get pictures. You know, I'm like 22 at the time and stupid.
Oh my
And
God.
so this rhino charges our group, and I take off running because I knew I was faster, at least in the short run, than my friend Todd, who was a long distance runner. And there was these 2 Peace Corps volunteers that were super slow. So I had like 3 human shields behind me. So I come back and the guide shimmies down a tree and yells at us, like, why didn't you run up a tree? Like, why didn't I run up a tree? Why didn't I try something brand new when I'm getting chased by a rhino? Because I went with what I knew best. All of us did, running. And so that's the same thing that happens in our brains is when we're stressed out and maxed out, we're going to go with what we know. We're not going to try something new. And so if we look at some of the research, there's this interesting research out of the University of Illinois. And so they were looking at the idea of vigilance decrement. So vigilance, how well you pay attention, decrement meaning breaking down over time. So the old view was that in the day, we have only a certain amount of energy and attention. And as we go through the day, we're pouring it out like a glass of water. And when we're done, we just got to sleep and kind of go regroup. And then you get that energy back the next day. So they wanted to challenge that to say, are there better ways we can use our energy that actually allow us to focus better to combat that vigilance decrement, that paying attention, breaking down over time? So what they did is in the first group, they gave them a 4-digit number. So say it was 4312. And whenever this 4312 showed up on a computer screen for an hour, you just had to hit this button. So these
Mm.
student participants are doing a super boring task. Okay, 4312 popped up, all these other numbers. At the end of that time, they had vigilance decrement. The amount they paid attention was worse at the end of the study than at the beginning. So then the second group, what they did is at the 1/3 mark, they gave them a 1-minute break. They told them something like, we put you on the wrong computer, just go hang out in the lobby. They didn't have any technology or anything, so they couldn't go on their phones or anything like that. Just hang out in the lobby for a minute and then come back. So then they came back, and at the 2/3 mark, they again gave a 1-minute break. So what they found is there was no vigilance decrement at the end of this study, that the amount they paid attention at the end was the same as at the beginning. So what that showed was that sometimes these micro breaks, not even
Mm.
long slow down breaks, these micro breaks can affect our brains in such a pronounced way that we can pay attention better with just 2 1-minute breaks in that period of time. So then if we expand that, we say, like, why is that? You think about if you've been doing something, say you've been walking through the jungle for 40 years and you've been told there's a tiger here and you've never seen a tiger, your vigilance decrement, the about amount that you're going to pay attention is going to go down because you've
Mhm.
never seen a tiger. You've heard it's there, but you've never even heard of someone seeing one. Now, say your best friend just told you that they got chased by one yesterday, or it's a new trail or something, you're going to pay attention. Our brains are the same way, where these students stepped away for just 1 minute, but it was enough to have their brains say, ooh, I got to pay attention again to this new thing. And so then they paid attention, then they pulled it out and went away for another minute and came back. It's the same as walking on a new trail, because our brains have not evolved that much to really be able to understand the difference between danger and our productivity.
You discussed these three internal inclination. Will you walk
Yeah.
us through that?
Yeah, so research is showing that there's three major internal inclinations that top performers have. So an internal inclination is a natural tendency. Now that doesn't mean that if you don't have it, that you can't develop it. A lot of people will
Mhm.
think pass fail, oh, they have it, so they're just going to be successful and I'm not. That's not it. It's that it can be developed over time. We just want to know what's your baseline. So the first one, I'll go through the three and then we can dig in depth if you
Okay.
want to each of them. So the first one is curiosity. The second one is an outsider perspective. And then the third one is the ability to move on it. So the first one, curiosity, you think about what we're often told, curiosity killed the cat. What a terrible thing for us to teach our kids, that if you're curious, you're going to die. And so we
Right.
we live in a society that perpetuates that myth. And that phrase, actually, I looked into it because I was like, where did that come from? There's a cat that got stuck in a chimney in the early 1900s, and it was like national news. So it was a slow news week, and the front page of the Washington Post said, "Curiosity killed the cat." So it became this thing that we just say but don't think about.
Oh my
But the
God.
reality is that people that are curious are more successful because they don't have this pass fail mentality. They don't have this being paralyzed by perfection. They'll do, say, a Facebook ads campaign, and if it's a quote failure, they'll say, well, that's interesting. Like, why was that a failure? What happened there? What's going on there? I even think about my daughters. They were outside the other day, and my nieces who live kind of in our same neighborhood were over. And so, we've got a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 10-year-old all outside together, and they find a dead mouse. And they're all around this dead mouse. And they're like, I wonder how that mouse died. I wonder what this mouse what's going to happen to
Mhm.
this mouse. Will an owl eat it? Do you think we should bury it? I mean, you can just picture these little girls like a million questions. Like, that's what curious adults should be, is what's going on here that
Right,
we don't
right.
understand. But usually we just say, oh, that Facebook ads campaign was a failure. So then you
Mm.
move into the ability to have an outsider perspective. There's all these research studies. There's one that's called the color study, where they brought people together in groups of 6 to 8 or so, and they looked at either the color blue or the color green. And they asked the group, what color is this? And there were some that were a little closer to blue or a little closer to green, and some were very obvious. And for the most part, people agreed, yep, that's green, that's blue, that's blue, that's green. Then they brought a second group in where two of the participants were part of the research study. And there were selected colors that were obviously blue, but that they were going to say are green, or were obviously green and they were going to say blue. And they found that statistically, those researchers that were kind of pushing the group in a different direction than what they intuitively knew had statistically more influence on the group than they should have had. And so over and over, we see that people like Einstein, who came from many different cultures and traveled the world, or Elon Musk or other folks, that when they have that outsider perspective, they actually can find solutions differently. I mean, even if you think about anytime you've been hired in a new job, you're like, that's weird. Why do they do it that way? We've all had that experience where they have some system and you're like, that's a stupid system. And you're an outsider questioning it. And if you have a good boss, that boss will say, ooh, maybe this outsider has some new insights here. So then the
Right.
third inclination is the ability to move on it. And so if we think about, typically things fall on a spectrum of speed being on one side and accuracy on the other. Now, if I go into the hospital, I want my surgeon, I want her to do the best job and the most accurate job possible. I don't care if it's fast, take as long as you need if I'm cut open. But in most of what we do in the business and counseling world, we're looking at speed over accuracy, because we're overthinking things. That this blog post takes 5 hours for us to write when really it should have taken 20 minutes. That if we can get content out there, if we can get ideas out there and get feedback on it, that actually helps us make progress quicker than if we overthink it. And again, we're paralyzed by perfection.
Oh my gosh. So that leads me to my next question, which is probably the main question for this interview, is that how do we get things done faster?
Yeah. So I think the thing that I would say is most important. So we've kind of walked through the book at the beginning, we have our internal inclinations. So we need to
Okay.
have our insides be correct before we ever do any productivity work or slow down work. We need to have our insides be okay. Then we
Hmm.
slow down, which then sets up our brain for success. So then we move into the ability to kill it. So now you're entering into the week. How do you get more done? So most people have heard about batching or sprinting, but they may have tried it, but they haven't got a whole lot done. The problem is they don't understand their sprint type. So in the same way we have personality types, new research is showing that we actually have sprint types. So there's how we do the work and when we do the work. So if we think about how we do the work, you're either a time block sprinter or you're a task switch sprinter. So a time block sprinter is someone that when you're doing the work, you do one type of work over a period of time. So you might set aside an entire morning to work on writing Thursday is the new Friday. Or for me, every Thursday, from 8:30 a.m. till about 3 o'clock, I was writing Thursday is the new Friday. It's one particular task. Whereas a task switcher is someone that every 20 minutes or so is moving their tasks. They need that variety. So first, we want to figure that out about yourself. And then secondly, we want to think about when do you work? So are you going to be an automated sprinter? So an automated sprinter is someone that puts it on repeat in the calendar. So for me, it was every Thursday. So I was an automated sprinter and I was a time block sprinter. So those two together. So it just is on repeat. Every Thursday I work on it. So some people might do all their podcast interviews on one day, or they might do a bunch of blog posts on one day every single week. So it just repeats itself. The other type is an intensive sprinter. So intensive sprinters, they go away for 2 or 3 days and they work on their business for that period of time. So Dr. Jeremy Sharp from the Testing Psychologist podcast is a perfect example of this. So he goes away for 2 or 3 days. He finds an Airbnb that's walking distance from a vegan restaurant because he's vegan. He wants to be close enough that he doesn't have to find parking. He wants it to have an outdoor space that he can work on. But then he's also a task switcher. He doesn't just work on his podcast when he's there. He might look at the books for his counseling practice. He might look at new ways to do testing. He might do some guests. He might plan out his content calendar. So he's doing a lot of task switching within that, but he goes away to do it rather than every single week have the exact same schedule.
You used your own method to launch this book.
So the to be the sprint type is something that I've developed, but then we've looked into the research of how there actually are different ways that people's brains operate kind of based on how they sprint. So typically people are just told, do a 20-minute sprint, batch all your stuff together, and it's left there versus let's first figure out how your brain operates, do some experiments to see if that actually works. And then if it's working like it should, then we can keep replicating that.
Awesome. Amazing. And thank you. Thank you so much. I know that we're running out of time, but I do want to see if you have any other, just maybe a few tips for our listeners on how we can start using Thursday as the new Friday before we even get the book, because I can't wait to read it, but I want to start now.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest quick tips that people can do is when they're looking at their weekend, and I start with the weekend because we need to slow down before then we can do the productivity. Most people start with the productivity, but if we start with your weekend and say, what's something I can add to the weekend and what's something I can take away? So figuring out, is that taking your kids to the beach? Is that, going for a bike ride? Is that, scheduling to have friends come over and do an outdoor barbecue? Whatever that one little thing is that you're adding that's going to make your weekend be better for your brain. And then what's something I can take away from the weekend that is going to help me as well? So that might be that I'm going to take away going out so late on a Friday night, or maybe it's going to be that I'm going to take away having to mow the lawn and I'm going to pay the neighborhood boy or girl to mow my lawn, every week for a little bit. So figuring out what's one thing I can add in and one thing that I can take away. And what you're going to find is that you're going to feel so much more prepared on Monday when you go into work. You're going to want to do that again and again. So then once you see that slowing down really is the key to speeding up, then it's going to be a lot easier to make that transition.
Yeah. And you're going to be so much more happier. You're mentally
Absolutely.
and physically, right? Okay. Now, I want to make sure we have time for my standout lightning round, where I ask you some questions and you give me the first answer that comes to mind. This is a way for my listeners and myself to get to know you a little bit more. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Number 1, if your life journey is a song, which song would it be?
Oh, I love Kesha's This Place About to Blow.
Okay. I love it. Okay. What is your most used emoji?
Ooh, probably the shocked face with the big eyes.
Oh, right. I love that one too. Okay. Famous for this karaoke song?
Ooh, I don't know if I'd say famous, but people remember when I sing Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi because it's usually so bad.
That's like the best song for karaoke. Last show you binged on?
I just watched Peaky Blinders, like all 5 seasons. It's like
Is that good?
if you like violence and some naughtiness, if you can handle, I wouldn't watch it with your kids, but no, it's sort of like an English mafia movie during like Prohibition era. So I
Right.
found it interesting.
Okay, comfort food.
Oh, biscuits and gravy. I just made it
Mm.
yesterday because I wanted it for breakfast this week.
Yum. Okay, name one thing on your bucket list.
One thing on my bucket list, I would love to go to Israel and kind of the Holy Land area.
Oh, love it. Okay, the last time you laughed out loud.
Oh, every Wednesday night. I'm in an improv group. And so
Oh,
every
you are?
Wednesday I crack up so hard all the time for like an hour and a half. I forget the world.
Improv. That's awesome. Okay, one thing you're grateful for.
My daughters.
Oh, I love it. Okay, and
I mean,
last
that's two
one.
things.
Okay, your favorite quote.
Favorite quote. When you say no to one thing, you say yes to something else.
Oh, wow. Love it. Okay. Thank you again for being in my podcast. I totally appreciate your time. And thank you for sharing with us your book. I can't wait to read it.
Oh, Grace, thank you
And
so much.
and please tell us how our audience can find you.
Yeah, so I have the website joesanok.com. That's where we have all the information about my keynote speeches, about the book coming out. Also, people are submitting their experiments of how they're making Thursday the new Friday, and also posting their own like book clubs. So if it's an open book club or just letting people know that there's book clubs, we want this to be a communal thing where we as a society are moving towards making Thursday the new Friday, that this 4-day work week is not going to be having one person like Henry Ford that does it, but us as a society. And then they can pick up the book wherever they get their books. So go to your local bookstore and say, hey, I want to pre-order Thursday is the new Friday. Go to Amazon, wherever you want to get your book, you should be able to get it.
All right. And I have it on hold already on Amazon.
Yay, that's awesome.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joe. What a fun interview. I hope you all enjoyed my conversation with Joe. I am so excited for his new book, Thursday's the New Friday. It's out this week, and there isn't a better time to push for the 4-day work week than now. So make sure you grab your copy this week. Slowing down to speed up. I love that. To be more productive. That's my key takeaway from this episode. Let's find a way to incorporate that in our day-to-day and make more time for things we love. Thank you all for your time today. To sign up for my free 7-part email course, please visit mariagracewolf.com. This course is for people who struggle with day-to-day stress and worries. By the end of the course, you will have some tools and techniques to manage your anxiety. Furthermore, if you enjoy this podcast, please be sure to hit subscribe, rate, and review. I would so appreciate it. The high rate and reviews will help others find the podcast so we can amplify, normalize, and break the mental health stigma. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. This is given with the understanding that neither the host nor the guest are providing legal, mental health, or other professional information. If you need a professional, you should find one. This podcast does not substitute for personal professional services.